International Development Conference. My name is Duncan Pickard. I'm a second-year master's student here, and welcome to this panel on exploring the role of the international community after the Arab Spring. I would like to introduce two people. First is my mom, who came all the way up from Martha's Vineyard this morning to the panel. Thanks. And then the second is Michelle Dunn, who is the moderator of the panel. She is the director of the Middle East Center at the Rafiq Hariri Middle East Center at the Atlantic Council in Washington. She's a former staff member at the U.S. Embassy in Cairo and the U.S. Consulate in Jerusalem, and also at the National Security Council, and she got her PhD from Georgetown University. So thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Duncan. Good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be with you this morning. Our topic is going to be the role of international organizations in supporting political reform in Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya. And we have a wonderful, wonderful panel to discuss this. To my left is Umazine Khalifa. She's from Tunisia. I believe you have biographies with you, but she is a human rights activist who returned to Tunisia from France to participate in the revolution there, and has since emerged as a leading figure in the Takatul party and ran for elections. And then after Omazine, we'll hear from Carlos Valenzuela, who is the director of elections, UN Chief Elections Advisor for Libya, Tunisia, and Egypt, and he has many years of experience in managing post-conflict elections for the United Nations. And then we'll hear from Enji Haddad from Egypt. She is a very well-known human rights advocate and a business leader. As is also the case with Umazine, in this new environment, she's become involved in politics and is now vice president of Muhafizin political party. So we have here with us three uniquely qualified people. We have two civil society activists who've now become involved in politics, and one international expert on elections in these transitional situations. I think our topic is particularly important because it's very important to clarify and shed light on what international organizations do and can do in political assistance. This is widely misunderstood, I think, here as well as in the countries in question, as being somehow interference in domestic politics. So I hope one thing our speakers will do will shed a little bit of light on what kind of things international organizations do and don't do in aiding political development. And I just want to throw out a few of my questions about this. I mean, one question is, which types of assistance in political reform are most needed in each country? We're talking about three countries in North Africa today, and they are quite different. Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya are each quite different in terms of the state of political development and civil society development, and what might be most needed to help them make successful democratic transitions. Another question I have is, what determines whether this assistance will be welcomed, whether international assistance will be welcomed? Will it be welcomed by political players, by the government, by the public? As you're probably aware, there's been a lot of controversy, particularly in Egypt, about international assistance to civil society. Is it the nature of the assistance that determines whether it's welcome or not, and by whom? Is it the relations with the former regime? For example, since the American government was very close with President Mubarak, is that something that contributes to suspicion and questions on the part of people in Egypt about whether American organizations are really aiding a democratic transition? So, which types of assistance are needed? Will it be welcome, and by whom? And then, also, I hope we will discuss what is the effect of international assistance on the indigenous civil society organizations working in the field. In what kind of circumstances do international organizations help to strengthen indigenous civil society organizations and amplify their voices? And in what situations can international organizations crowd out indigenous organizations and even corrupt the field with perhaps too much money, and so forth. So these are some of the questions in my mind. Each of the panelists is going to speak for about 15 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions. We did start about 10 minutes late, so I'm going to steal a little 10 minutes or so from your break in order that we can have a full conversation. So I will turn over the floor to Omazine with a gentle warning to all three panelists that I am a ruthless moderator in terms of enforcing time limits. So please, Omazine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, everybody, for being here and attending this very important panel to me. Before talking about the role of international community after the revolution in Tunisia, I would like to show you my flag. I'm very proud of it since the revolution. So, this is a Tunisian flag, and 2 years ago it would have been propaganda to show it, and yeah, it would have meant that I am with the dictatorship. But now it's the symbol, it's not only my flag, but it's a symbol of free people. It's the symbol of the first Arab and Muslim free people that organized this democratic election, and it's only the symbol of a newborn first Arab democracy. It's very important for me because it reminds me how important the fight is. It's only the beginning. Now I will be talking about the role of international community during the period of transition, and I will focus on the support that was provided to political parties, as I am involved in the Catholic Party, as you said, Michelle, and I was a candidate for the Constituent Assembly. So I will try to answer to 3 questions. How adapted this help was to the context, how helpful it was to us, and how it was perceived by both political parties but also Tunisian public opinion. And what I would say is that in Tunisia there is a will to collaborate with international community, but there is a lot of suspicion concerning the real agenda, what we call in Tunisia the hidden agenda of the international community. Thus, globally, the international help is welcome when it does not interfere with internal political affairs of parties, of the government, and also the civil society itself and what it wants to do in the country. The question is, when is the support changes from technical assistance to real interference in managing the internal affairs? And I would like to say that it is important for me to talk about the Tunisian public opinion first, before moving to the importance to this help to political parties. It is the first time that Tunisian public opinion is important, actually. No one cared under dictatorship about what Tunisians think and what they want and what they perceive as good or bad for them. So it's very important. Today, figures are real. We know that they are not changed anymore, that statistics tend to reflect what Tunisian thinks. And during dictatorship, this is important for me to remind, all political opponents were accused to be agents of the foreign forces, that they were agents of foreigner services, intelligence services. And for those who were particularly loved by the regime, it was publicly said in a newspaper controlled by the police that they were CIA, Mossad, or Freemasons sometimes. So we have this background of the Tunisian public opinion towards politics, towards international community interference, and we fear in it. That's why we have this suspicion background. Now, after the 14th of January, this suspicion obviously didn't disappear, and what I say is that the fear is already is still present. First, because before dictatorship also we were under the protectorate of France. This is also something that belongs to our history. We were for 80 years controlled by France. So, and today it's very important because we moved from protectorate to authoritarian regime, then to dictatorship. And it is the first time now that we are alone, that we need to prove that we are able to build our democracy without any interference. And we saw also what international interference in domestic affairs, how it influenced other countries. So, for example, for US government interference in Iraq and Afghanistan and how it supports Israel, all these are present in Tunisian public opinion. So we don't want to have this kind of interference in our country. And concerning European partnership, it's different. There is no homogeneous opinion on how Europe is perceived. It depends on the country and relationship to each country. So if I focus on France, it's very particular. It's between love and hatred. France, for example, has helped us after our independence in '56 to build our institutions that were actually still standing after the revolution, and helped the country to continue and not fall apart. And it helped also, France helped to apply the education policy of our President Bourguiba, and that is also one element that helped to have a revolution, because our young people are educated and well educated thanks to this policy. And today France is our first business partner, and we have the biggest quantity, the number of tourists, the highest number of tourists come from France in Tunisia. But it supported the Zine Abidine Ben Ali during the revolution. And this support was to bring additional security forces to help our police to oppress our people. That was France's answer during the revolution. And this is not only interference in internal Tunisian affairs, but also a complete error of understanding what was really happening in Tunisia. But today, and it's very weird, French help is very welcome and well perceived by Tunisian opinion. It's like a natural, obvious assistant during the process of democratization. So it's not easy actually to understand. But I wouldn't say the same thing about Gulf countries, because there is always also Gulf countries that want to participate now in the process. And in Tunisia, we know that these countries are not democratic. So we are wondering now what's their purpose. It is not for them. I mean, it's a threat even to their democracy. It's a threat of their existence. So Qatar, for example, signed an agreement with the new government to assist civil society associations. But we are wondering which association they will help. They will be wanting to help, because we know from the past that they were helping to build mosques in Tunisia. And since a revolution, Al Jazeera invited mostly Islamist party leaders only. So it's not an impartial view of the Tunisian political scene. Something very important also that Tunisians don't forget about Gulf countries is that Qatar is sheltering Sakhr Matri, who is the son-in-law of Ben Ali, and Saudi Arabia is sheltering Ben Ali himself and his wife. So it is, to conclude this first part about how Tunisians perceive the international community help, you see that it is very different depending from where this help comes from. And also, they don't see the difference between assistance provided by a government or an association or an organization founded by this government. The nationality of this assistance counts more than where it is a government or an organization. Also, I tell that suspicion in Tunisia is everywhere, not towards international community only, but also it is suspicion of political parties, of governments, and all decision bodies in general. And it's healthy to a certain extent, because we cannot be manipulated anymore. At least we want to believe that we cannot be manipulated anymore. But even for international community, the help should be transparent and clear. It's communicating what you're doing and why you're doing it is very important, because we have been, all these things have been hidden for us for years and years, and we are all learning how it works. And transparency and accountability should work for government, political parties, but also our international partners. Today we demand, actually, transparency and accountability. Now I will move to the second part of my talk concerning political parties. Political parties have a more pragmatic approach in general to international community help. We take what is useful to the party, experience and skills, period. Our political decisions are independent from the support, period. And it's in general like this. I'd like to say that under dictatorship, international organizations were forbidden to work in the country. And it didn't stop them to help actually political opponents to build their capacity. And they would bring people abroad to train them. And in my party, for example, activists were trained abroad on how to manage a campaign and how to observe elections, because in 2009 we had presidential elections, and obviously Ben Ali won for 99%. I can't remember the percentage because we don't care. We know that the results in advance, but NDI, for example, National Democratic Institute, helped us to observe elections, and it was very dangerous at that time for the activists, but they did it. And our politics didn't change since the revolution. And we still work with NDI, but we have also other partners, now new partners, European and US funded organizations. And it's very important to have this partnership actually, because except from Islamist party, which has a structure that used to work under secretiveness during 30 years, and the RCD, the former dictatorship party, which is not legally recognized anymore, all the other parties are not structured and are weak in terms of fundings and capacities. And now the new structures also that have been created after revolution need to know how to organize and how to reach the people, and all these things are provided by this international community. To quote, for example, my party at Takato, before the 14th of January we were 200 members, 200 activists, and 95% of them were men and old men in general, and the rest between young and women, because it was a resistance party and not an opposition actually. It was very hard to be in opposition party under dictatorship. Now, in a few months, my party reached more than 20,000 members. You can imagine how organized we were to manage a campaign in that period of time. I'm talking about 3 or 4 months, to run elections for the first National Constituent Assembly democratic elections. Many skills were needed, actually, all skills. So I can quote how to structure a political party, how to organize a political party, how to communicate within your members, how to build a political message, how to outreach your message, and how to communicate in media. So the organization working in Tunisia were very helpful, bringing experts from abroad, Latin America and in Eastern Europe especially, that had revolutions and have some years of experience. They helped also for logistics and training people in the region that couldn't afford to come. And Tunisian law is very restrictive, actually. So we cannot receive any fund from any international help community. And this was very important for us that our partners also understand this need. So we insisted that we, as political party, take only skills and experience sharing. Yes, and it was reassuring for us that, for example, US organization worked with all parties regardless of ideology, because it was showing that they wanted to be neutral, that they were really bringing skills and not ideology. But also we were fearing that our information strategy was, information was brought to other parties, so we were not so confident, but we worked with them and it was very important. Eventually, all what I'm describing here is the process of building a relationship of confidence within partners. And this relationship, generally tainted by suspicion in the beginning, but forced by the context, but a relationship that evolved and still evolving and becoming more and more solid, a partnership that's definitely helpful and will be in the future more helpful as we are building our parties and learning how democracy mechanisms work. In Tunisia, again, and to conclude, the international community help is welcome as when it doesn't interfere with internal affairs. It's very important that we are independent in our decisions. And so the support is needed, but our partners need to know that Tunisians, we are a proud people with a painful past of protectorate and oppression, which we cannot accept anymore to be on trusteeship. It's the first time of Tunisian history that people can decide and realize what they want and learning what democracy is. So, to our partners, don't fear us, don't fear our democracy, and trust us, we will succeed together. Thank you.
Thank you for all the inspiring things you had to say about the Tunisian people, but I do think they made one mistake, which was not electing you. I'm pretty sure that mistake will be corrected in the future, though. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Carlos, and Carlos, we want to hear about all your experience in this region, but I also want to know we're bereft of a Libyan on this panel, so I hope especially you will tell us a little bit about the environment in Libya.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. I'm also very scared, intimidated, being part of this panel. I'm not a member of the region, I'm not a representative of civil society or political parties, I'm actually the representative of the international bureaucrats that we're trying to see what they're doing. So anyway, I hope I'm not at the defensive. I just try to share a little bit my thoughts and the experiences that I have had the privilege to have, which is to direct UN electoral assistance in Egypt, and then Tunisia, and then Libya, and all of them at the same time. So I would just say by saying that as a member of the international community, and a member of the international community of support of governance and democratic purposes, but very much particularly on elections, when we saw the events of the Arab Spring, and actually I stopped talking about the Arab Spring a few months ago because I noticed nobody in the region did. Being Latin American, to use the word revolution, it just means so much. And I could not bring myself to say revolution in Egypt or Tunisia. And then I realized that that was my own bias as a foreigner. They talk about the revolutions and they're very proud of the revolutions, so I think we should refer to them as revolutions. But when we were seeing the revolutions taking place, which took everybody by surprise, everybody, in particular the international community, we did see this, and I'm as guilty as everybody else, as wow, a new opportunity, a new area of work is opening up. This is great, and what is happening is really wonderful, and we can go and be a part of it, and and of course the fact that all countries, the 3 countries after the revolution, did decide that political transition will go through early elections, to elect a parliament that would somehow be involved later in the drafting of the constitution, made us think, yes, this is what we need to do. And that was all confirmed, particularly in the case of Tunisia, by a very quick formal request from the new government for the international community to come in and support the electoral process. In Egypt, things in Egypt are always a little bit more complicated than everybody else and everywhere else. And we did not get that directly, but we did get from Field Marshal Tantawi, the Secretary General, got the assurance that they would be welcoming UN electoral support. And throughout the months that came, the SCAF kept reassuring the Secretary General that, yes, we want your support. So we felt, yes, this is it. This is our time to go in, and a brand new, wonderful chapter in the story of international support to elections is open. Well, I'm going now to, from the expectations that we had to the challenges that we really had to face. The first one is that this basic assumption that we all had, which is assistance is wanted, was not true. And in our case, it's not true. And I have to say something that makes me a little bit in different levels than my colleagues in the panel, is that for the UN, our electoral support is mostly focused on electoral management bodies, not on civil society, not on political parties. But I should say that there was a very strong reaction in Tunisia, but particularly in Egypt, about international support. You know, and I will completely confirm exactly what our colleague has said now. Why are you interested now in providing us with support when for so many years you have supported authoritarian regimes? What gives you the moral authority to even come and offer support to democracy? And to be honest, that's something that I had absolutely no answer to. It was just a statement of facts and something that we had to be very much conscious of, that we did not have that moral stature to come and offer assistance. That's one thing. The other one is, of course, everybody did think that you know, there are all these agenda issues. You know, the country has been the countries in the region have been subject to interference and everything with closed agendas behind. So everybody said, why this enthusiasm to come and support us? And I should say that in all three countries, I saw the international community being very enthusiastic, too enthusiastic. We are going to support you, almost like imposing it, but out of goodwill. Yet, it's everybody say, what gives you the right, you know, and what is your agenda? I should say that because I work with the UN, and we always have this idea, which has been true in most places, that we have a certain legitimacy because we're not really representing a government or a region or things. Well, in the Arab world, we don't have a lot of funds. You know, we are not really seen as something that works well, and basically we've always been associated with the failure of the resolution of the Palestinian problem, which, of course, having worked in Palestine for a couple of years, you know, and having faced in Israel, again, a lot of antipathy to the UN because they see us as being very pro-Palestinian and pro-Arab. The only consolation is that Palestinians do think that we are supporting them. But really, in this area, we're not very well looked up, and we have a very bad track record. So we could not build upon this trust for the UN. That's one thing. There was another thing, and I will say this with the utmost respect, but you know, I've seen pride in many different areas of the world where I worked. I have never seen it expressed in a manner like it's expressed in the region, you know. And as Omzedin was saying, you know, they're proud people, and they have gone through a lot, and they have, you know, their revolutions were not easy, and they cost a lot in terms of everything. So they're not willing to just have anyone come in and tell them what to do at all. And it's not because they don't know about electoral administration, and believe me, again, with respect, there is not a lot of expertise in electoral administration in the area, but they're still not willing to have us come in and say, okay, this is what you have to do, and this is how you have to do it. There's also this idea that it's a bit of a misconception that electoral assistance is something that's offered to the failed states of the world. And actually, the fact that I was chosen to go for the UN there, when I have been heading some of the biggest UN electoral assistance missions, you know, in Iraq and Afghanistan and East Timor and Liberia and Sierra Leone and Congo, then people say, oh, those are failed states. We're not a failed state. And that's what I keep hearing everywhere. Even in Libya, and after all the war and everything else, we're not a failed state. But particularly in Tunisia, and of course in Egypt, that's a marching chant. We are not a failed state. So don't treat us like a failed state. And of course we say, but we're not treating you like a failed state. But just the idea of offering assistance was, yes, you are treating us like a failed state. We don't need assistance. But this is related to another issue. In the region, elections are perceived from a very political perspective. Elections are all about politics and about law, and the legal issue is very, very much there. That's why there's such, for us, surprising emphasis on the role of the judiciary in elections, which is really not the same case in most places. Which says that, we at the UN, we channel our electoral support mostly on support to the electoral administration, because we believe that that's an important key factor to provide credibility to the elections. And this was something like speaking Chinese to the Egyptians and the Tunisians. They said, what do you mean? The only problems that we had about elections was lack of political will. Now there is political will to go ahead with the elections. There is no problem with the elections. And I said, yes, but no, all of that is electoral administration. And don't insult us by telling us that we don't know how to do this. We are Tunisians. We are Egyptians. We know how to do elections. It says that elections were bad because of political will. Well, that's not our view. The fact is that there were not credible elections in Egypt and Tunisia for many, many decades, which meant that they didn't have to meet any kind of standards. And there was no operational pressure. For one of the reasons is that very few people went to vote. I tried to find procedures for counting the votes in both Tunisia and Egypt, and there were none, for obvious reasons. So, but still, it was felt that this was not important. It was something that you could do, because we're not failed states, because we have strong infrastructure, because we have this, and we have expertise. And that's where I had a disagreement. There was a lot of expertise about electoral theory and this, but very little in terms of electoral administration, which is what we are all about. So, we had a lot of trouble trying to make people understand that procedures for electoral administration were important. I mean, this is one of the bases. And therefore, that you needed to train your electoral staff and your poll staff on procedures. And the answer was always, well, why do we need procedures for? We have the laws. It says, yes, but then you translate the laws into regulations and into procedures and operational guidance. No, but you don't need to, because we have the judges. And the judges will be able to do this, and will be able to do that. And when I had a very high-level meeting in Cairo, the whole delegation of the electoral authorities, of the Egyptian authorities, stand up and leave because I had offended them by saying that we could help me training electoral staff. I said, what do you mean? This is not a failed state. And they said to me very much, this is not Ivory Coast, this is not Afghanistan, this is not Colombia. So I said, okay, that's, we no longer talk about training in, but this is the type of things. Finally, I have to say that one of the challenges that we had, to be honest, is the high expectations from the international community. And they have seen us play a role in Afghanistan, in the Iraqi elections, in Congo elections, and they expected that we would play the same role. And the fact that I had been working in these countries made a lot of our member states, and in particular certain member states that are more equal than others in the Security Council, expecting that we would do something, and what is the UN doing for elections here? And my answer always was, the only thing that we can do, which is to build trust. But I'll get to them later. So there were these expectations. So one of the major problems that we have, now that we knew that electoral administration was our focus, is we had no access to the electoral administrations. First of all, the nature of the electoral administrations, they all reinvented themselves, and they were new. They had no experience, but they had no acknowledgement of the responsibilities that they were acquiring in terms of the actual administration. And yet, so it looked very bleak. And I have to say that while I adore Cairo, it's one of my favorite cities in the world, it was probably in my 20 years in the UN some of the most frustrating times that I've had in it. And yet, and it all looked bleak, and in Tunisia we had a lot of problems because the Electoral Commission, when we all came in a very, and we were the UN, IFIS, and the European Union, and there, finally the Electoral Commission was there, we just rushed to the easy and said, we're here to help you. And we scared them off completely, and there was a complete shutout, absolute shutout. And it took us months to build trust and to build confidence for them to understand that we were there to support them, not to take over the process, not to make decisions for them, etc. That meant a lot of changes from our attitude and posture. But a year later, I am happy to say, there is trust in those two countries, and I'll go to Libya later. You know, we have had access. The EASY really came to us and was really depending a lot on the work that we did, electoral administration work. In Egypt, there has been an incredible reconnaissance of our work. The Presidential Electoral Commission has requested from us a lot of work. The night before I came here, but that's 2 nights ago, we had a large dinner by the Ministry of Interior to the UN delegation for support on electoral authority, asking for additional support. So, what have we done right? What have we gotten here? And I can say that in 2 minutes. Quickly, is that we have changed our approach. We have learned that in the Arab region, we need to be low-key, we need to be low-profile, we need to ensure that they know and that we know that we're not at the driver's seat, that we are there to treat them with respect. It's not because they don't have electoral experience, electoral administration experience, that they're not still responsible and accountable for the process. Which means having to accept electoral processes that are not quite exactly what an old international bureaucrat like myself would like to see. And there were times in Tunisia where I had to close my eyes, and in Egypt it was eyes and ears. But the processes were credible. The processes, they were politically credible. The results were accepted, and that's what you talk about a successful election, is when the results are accepted, even if you don't like them. Even if you're not elected, you still accept the results. But we also have the idea that democracy and transition is not just one successful election, and it's a number of other successful elections. And we are very conscious that in order to have a consolidated transition, you need to improve, particularly in the area of electoral administration. I probably don't have time to talk about Libya, but I'll just keep it for any questions that you have. We have learned that we can and should not only work with electoral authorities, we were forced to work with other stakeholders. We don't do a lot of work with political parties because the UN doesn't like to get involved in it, but we worked with political candidates, and in Tunisia we had a very interesting part of our project in supporting women candidates, and right now we're working with media, which we felt was another area to work. So yes, it's been incredibly challenging. I'll just finish by saying that for me, it has been very tiring. Everybody says I look much more tired than I used to a year ago, but it's been an enormous privilege to just be a witness of this process. So thanks.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you. That was a very sobering, I think, reality check of what it's like for international organizations in this environment in the Arab countries. But I'm glad to hear that the process of building trust is somehow proceeding. And now that you've spoken, I'll just embarrass you a little bit by I was so delighted to hear that Carlos was on this panel, because I had heard his name so many times, and I just want to tell you how very, very well respected he is by other experts on electoral laws, who always said to me, "Oh, well, Carlos Valenzuela, he's really the one who knows all about this." And I'm a little upset at you for not speaking about Libya. I hope, is the Libya question out there? If somebody get it ready, okay? Because we do want to talk about Libya a little bit too. Okay, thank you. Angie, the floor is yours. Tell us about Omedunia.
Yeah, Masr is definitely not Colombia. Definitely. But I'm not going to walk out of the room, Carlos. And I'm sorry you had to go through that, but in Egypt, you need to recognize there's a lot of very unique situations right now. The second comment I have is international aid is not philanthropy. It comes with a price tag and it comes with an agenda. Hidden or not, it's an agenda. We need to take it when the agendas meet our agendas and leave it when we have a problem with what it offers. And the last point I have, because everything else was talked about, is that while we're not failed states, we are needy states. And yes, in my country we need help, because everything is moving so fast. And while we have institutions and we have bureaucracy, we have also laws that were drawn to ensure corruption prevails, to ensure that unfairness is there. Corruption was written into the laws of Egypt. And I'll give an example of a very successful support we've received from the international community. We've always been cooperating with Transparency International, United Nations Convention Against Corruption, and just before President Mubarak resigned or was removed, or I don't know what it is until now. We haven't decided until now whether he was deposed or resigned or retired or on vacation. We communicated to the United Nations Office of Drug and Crime and asked for their help, because we believed that this was the time that we need to impose certain implementation processes within the UNCAC that would help us investigate the corruption in Egypt. We never got a response back. Never. Not even an acknowledgement of the email. On the other hand, we called Transparency International, and I found a tremendous amount of support from all over the world. I was communicated with from Switzerland, from Britain. People came back to us with processes on how we should be moving towards freezing the funds of money that was leaving Egypt at that point. I think they believed that around $10 billion left the country in 18 days. And we wanted to stop that because we knew we were going to suffer the outcome of that. But there was no help. Not from anybody. Not the World Bank, not the United Nations, but the NGOs helped. Now, we could not stop it, but we tracked it. And I also remember that we were connected into Abbas, and Abbas collected for us something like 1 million signatories, and they staged a demonstration in front of the G8 meeting in Paris. The outcome of that was the freezing of some assets, not all. The US only froze the assets something like 9 months later. So, international community and international cooperation is needed, yet not necessarily available when you want it, or for what you want it for. Conversely, on the other side, I can't tell you how many international bodies communicated with us saying, we have money. Would you like us to train your people on how to do a campaign? Well, that's not what we wanted. That's not what we need it for. We have money. Would you like us to help you monitor the elections? That's not your call. It's my call. Our people shall monitor their own elections because it's them that will decide whether or not to believe in it. But money to insist or action to insist that we get the independence of judiciary reform done, we don't have any. In fact, it took the US 4 months to report to us on the name of a corrupt official who took a bribe from Mercedes. And they claimed it's national security. So, international aid is not philanthropy. We recognize that. We have an agenda as a group and as a party and as NGOs in Egypt because we have a very strong base and a very respectable base of NGOs in Egypt. They've worked during horrible times, suffered dramatically, and they need help, and they have an agenda. Any international community or organization or country that wants to help with this agenda is going to be welcome. Now, on the question of perception. Perception is always the media. The problem with internationally is they have the agenda in giving that aid, and they don't look at how they should communicate. A case in point is exactly what happened with the NGO disaster in Egypt. Here we have, I think, 5 or 6 international organizations, well respected, operating in Egypt, helping Egyptians. In fact, believe it or not, training Salafi parties on winning the election. I find that really bad, but that's okay. That's okay. Training the Brotherhood and the Salafis on campaigning. And a political problem happens between the US and Egypt that has nothing to do with the NGOs. And both countries decide to play chicken. So Egypt is escalating, the US is not responding. And in between is the NGO society, internationally and Egyptian, has been labeled as spies, a bloodbath in the media, and the US is not responding. And Germany is not responding. And all other countries are not responding. And we are investigated. We're called into state security. We're called spies. And we should defend 3 or 4 or 5 huge international organizations. You want the individuals to do that? So where's the responsibility that comes associated with opening a branch in Egypt? Where is that? Last but not least, I'll address a question that I believe is very important. Can international aid corrupt? Of course. Of course. It corrupts, and it corrupts a lot. And it's at a certain stage in Egypt, it was like there was too much money flowing into the country. Now, from all parties concerned, and I include to that Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the Gulf, who, by the way, poured in billions, by far more than all the international other European or American countries. And it does corrupt. Because this money goes in and there are no institutions through which, or projects, sustainable projects that will deliver to the people a tangible benefit, ready to absorb them. So what happened with the aid coming from the Arab world? We distributed sugar and butter and chicken and I don't know what, subsidized that to the poor people. So that's where the aid goes. And where did the aid from the foreign European and American community go? It went to monitors that stood in front of polling stations, writing reports that nobody shall read. And in fact, not necessarily even standing in front of them. They are filling them, and they get like $1 a piece for every report they write. So what have we done here? We've taught the Egyptians that to ensure that they have a fair election in their own country, they need to be paid. That's not good. That's not acceptable. Money should go into building institutions that we need, into building an accountability platform, into building something that I saw yesterday and I intend to tap into with this hat, the capability of tangibly documenting corruption cases, the capability of holding the government accountable. We need to be taught all that. But it seems that the international bodies have an agenda. They don't want to teach us that. They'd like to teach us something else. And somewhere in between, we're going to have to live. So, I end with, while we're not a failed state, we're a needy state. And there is nothing wrong, and it doesn't affect my pride to say that. We have suffered for so long, and we're going to be great. And to be great, we need help. And I thank you.
Thank you very much, Angie, and that It's really helpful to hear that perspective coming from someone who's worked as long as you have. You're not a newcomer to this. Many years before the Egyptian revolution, you were working on anti-corruption and other important issues like that. Okay, I think we're going to open it up for questions now. I see there are 2 microphones, so please go to a microphone if you'd like to ask a question. We'd love to know just briefly your name and where you're from, and let me know if you have a question for a specific panelist, or if you want more than one person to comment. So I think we'll start. I think you were the first one there. We'll start with you.
Hi, I'm Ilya Lazowski from the Fletcher School. Thanks very much for a very interesting panel. My question can be to anybody. A frequent criticism of the international aid community has been that Western understanding of civil society can be a very Western understanding of civil society, and that a lot of the assistance goes to very professional, elitist organizations in capitals, in large cities, and that the actual grassroots civil society, which includes religious organizations and trade unions, workers' unions, and even organizations that are completely non-political, are often ignored by Western organizations. So I was wondering if you've seen any kind of improvement in that area, or if you've seen international organizations that recognize that civil society is not just internationally funded NGOs in capital cities. Thanks.
Okay, great. All right, let's start with that. Angie, would you like to comment on that first?
Yes, there is some great work happening in areas that you wouldn't imagine in Egypt. But this comes, CARE is there, Caritas is there, a lot of US aid is also there. There's some good that happens. And it's very difficult to find a small organization in a needy place and build its capacity. But yes, we have that. We would love more than that. But it depends on, really, I conclude it depends on the person managing the funds. Some people like Carlos here would really take it to heart. They love the countries, and you'll find that usually this is how it works. They love the country and they search for the correct projects and they invest in that. It takes a lot more of them than simply a well-written document that's written nicely with some pictures on it and some statistics and that they can fund. So it depends really on the people managing the funding.
Would any of the other panelists like to comment on this? I will maybe just add one comment. I did work for the State Department in the past. I've never worked for USAID, but in my observation of USAID and other large donor organizations over the years, there's a certain tension within them because on the one hand, they're under some pressure to do exactly what you say, to go out and find new organizations that really need the help and that really are in touch with the grassroots in the country and doing good work and so forth. On the other hand, they're under pressure, and often, for example, from the U.S. Congress, they have a lot of money that they have to move, and they're under pressure to keep their own bureaucracies very small. And therefore, they say, if we're only allowed to have X number of people and so forth on our staff, we can't manage all these little, $10,000 grants or $20,000 grants. So there's a certain bureaucratic, it's an unintended consequence, I think, sometimes of pressure on aid bureaucracies that they feel they have to give larger grants, and therefore they have to give the larger grants to organizations who they know are capable of handling them and of accounting for them, because there's a tremendous pressure for accounting for all this money and making sure it didn't disappear into corruption or something. So I mention that not by way of defending this kind of choice of well-known organizations, but just by explaining, I think, why it happens. It isn't purely laziness on the part of the donors.
Volkan Emre from Turkey. I'm a graduate student in development economics at HTW Berlin. My question will be to Ms. Khalifa. What about the level of suspicion on Turkey's interests and honesty in Tunisia? after the revolution. And so do you think that Turkey might be a role model for Tunisia? And just one small remark, and I think that it's a really very painful process of institutional transition, so towards so democracy. It took more than 80 years in Turkey, and then yet, and so far, actually, I can say that we have in my understanding, in my opinion, it's not such a good democracy to model, but this is my opinion. Yeah, just two questions. Thanks.
Thank you for bringing this question about Turkey, because we watched Turkey just after revolution, because for us, you succeeded in separating politics and religion. At least in your constitution, you have a real secular constitution. And that's what we wished, at least just after revolution, to have a separation of, state, politics, and religion. Now today, it seems that it's not possible. Actually, the Islamist party, the one equivalent of AKP in your country, tried actually to have Sharia, so which is Islamic law, as unique source of law in the constitution. So it would have been a regression actually comparing to our suspended constitution. But now, with the secular parties, as my parties, we succeeded to find a consensus on the first article of this constitution and to maintain that Islam is a religion of state, which means that we don't advance either in terms of human rights, are also on full equality between men and women. And we are going far away actually from your model, because we are not succeeding at least to be real secular country. Now the Islamist party, when it welcomed AKP leader, said that it wants to be as AKP. So it is part of their double language, because to be as AKP is to have to fight for a secular constitution and to separate politics and religion. And that's in facts, actually, in real facts, they are doing completely the opposites. So we would have wished if they followed what they said and followed your model, but we are far from it now.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. My name is Whitney Tom. I'm from Boston University and will be at American University next year. This is actually directed to Carlos Valenzuela, if you may. Yesterday I actually had the opportunity to listen to the up-and-coming chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, and we had a great discussion about building the rule of law and ending impunity in sub-Saharan Africa, and of course the Arab Spring came up. My question is, in building these rule of law and establishing fair and free elections in the context of transitional justice in countries like Tunisia, Egypt, and Kenya, for example, what is the international community doing, and perhaps your electoral body in the United Nations, doing to showcase your work in these countries to kind of pave the way for other countries like Kenya? All your hard work that's going on in Tunisia and Egypt, what is that showing? How do you promote that work to show Kenya kind of what you're doing so that they can perhaps be ready and learn from those examples?
Okay, thanks. One of the lessons that we have learned in working in electoral assistance in these countries is our international perspective. I think that's what we can provide the Tunisians and the Libyans and the Egyptians. It is up to them to make their own decisions and to work their own models. What we can help is in bringing the experiences of other areas of the world. And I think we've really been focusing on that. We have identified certain areas that are like basic modalities of electoral systems. And we are working on these issues and working with all the three communities at the same time. One of them is the issue of the electoral administration models. And the three countries, being completely different, have decided to reinvent their electoral administration models and to go for models that would be more independent. We just finished this week a 3-day workshop in Cairo with a big participation from Libyans and Tunisians on the principles of establishing independent, sustainable electoral bodies, including transparency and professionalism. And we brought experts from, or members of electoral management bodies from 12 countries around the world to share their experiences, not to prescribe their experiences, but to share their experiences. And I think this is part of the good results. We're now getting a lot of support from, a lot of trust from the countries that we're working with. How do we transfer that outside of the region? At the moment, I'm not really sure. We are working on lessons learned, trying to codify, because I do believe that our experience in our countries is teaching us a lot, and we want to qualify our electoral assistance in the rest of the world. I think that'd be useful. But we are still very much in the process of trying to understand what is happening to us and what we're learning.
Thank you. I'm James Buchanan. I'm a graduate student at the Graduate School of Public and International Affairs at the University of Pittsburgh. This is more focused on Libya and what's going on right there. Due to the recent, the simmering conflict rising in the east, not in the east, but in the south and the west of Libya, what is the thought process going on for Libyans on whether or not to postpone the elections that are coming up in June for the Constituent Assembly? And how has the international community made themselves available to offer assistance or to be requested for assistance to the National Transitional Council and to the Libyan growing civil society?
If I could just add to that, thank you, James. I just wanted to add a question about Libya also for Carlos. How is the environment or the receptivity to international assistance in Libya? Is it different from what it is in Tunisia and Egypt? I mean, Libya is so different from the other two countries in terms of the history of civil society and political organizations, as well as its relations with much of the international community before the revolution. Plus, of course, they had a much longer and more violent path to change in Libya.
Thanks, and sorry for not mentioning Libya, but I just talked too much. So a lot of the challenges that I mentioned that we had in Egypt and Tunisia, they also apply to Libya, And I think I'm so conscious of the differences and the uniqueness of Egypt compared to Tunisia, compared to Libya, that we sometimes forget to see that there are many common traits among them, and that they are neighbors and brothers and sisters, and that they do have a lot to learn from each other and to teach each other. But there is a basic difference between Libya and the other two countries, and it's that there is a very big institutional vacuum in Libya that doesn't exist in Egypt or Tunisia. And one of the reasons why the elections were possible in terms of credibility, despite the administrative deficiencies, is because you did have that capacity in Egypt through the Ministry of Interior. And while ostentatiously the Ministry of Interior had been put aside in Tunisia, they actually did play a very intelligent and discreet role in supporting the Electoral Commission that was there. This is not possible in Libya. So this is the big issue. It's how are they going to go about it? And while Egypt and Tunisia had failed elections, Libya had none, absolutely none, and really makes a difference. You can tell that the level of ignorance, and I don't say it with disrespect, but a level of not knowing about electoral institutions and practices is really, really much more profound than any of the two countries. So that makes it, I mean, it's been very challenging everywhere, but in Libya it gives very specific challenges. Now, the Libyans themselves have set them a very tight agenda. And while there were discussions in Egypt and Tunisia as to how soon should the elections be, there's very little of that in Libya, at least from what I have been able to see. And everybody wants the early elections ASAP. The civil society and public opinion in general, because they have suspicion, and suspicion is always there. And they feel that maybe the National Transitional Council does not want to give power so soon, and that the elections will be postponed. The National Transitional Council, which is overwhelmed and a little bit just thinking that the task is too much for them, they want to go to that legitimacy stage of having a government that has been elected, or at least a parliament that has been elected, and they are pushing very much for the timetable to be done. Operationally, it looks very complicated. But everybody wants these elections to take place. I have not heard anyone who thinks that the election should be postponed. I'm sure there are there, but it's not a big systematic, like you would hear sometimes in Egypt and in Tunisia. So what I can see, and our work, how the international community responded, well, the support that is required from the international community and led by the UN is much, much stronger than what was necessary or requested in either of the two countries. So we do have much more of a traditional, we do have a UN special political mission, UNSMIL, that has a huge electoral division that is in charge of providing operational support, so not just technical support, but operational support. And actually we had to create recently a UNDP electoral assistance project because nobody ever imagined that the Libyans would require financial assistance. That was just not in the cards. And all the planning was done thinking, well, the Libyans are rich enough, they can pay for their own elections. Well, yes and no, because there's an incredible cash flow problem at the moment. And elections, when they're all about deadlines and timeline, and it's very hard for them to get the necessary funds to do the startup work and the first electoral operations. And there is, even now that the NTC was able to, the government gave the first tranche of money necessary to the Electoral Commission, they realized they don't have the capacity, the operational capacity to spend it on time. So they're asking us, please take the money and spend it for us, because we just cannot do it. So there is a much higher level of support on the operational side, etc. But yeah, we just...
Thank you.
Okay, in an effort to make sure that everybody gets to ask their questions, I'm going to take a couple of questions at a time. So go ahead, please.
Okay. Thank you everyone for coming. My name is Ayana Izaki. I'm a student at Brown University. My question specifically is directed towards Ms. El Haddad. Given that organizations like that, like American-backed organizations like the IRI or the NDI were present in Egypt for quite some time before the revolution, and it's widely perceived to have made no impact at all on democratization in general, what do you think is their relevance in context, undemocratic contexts or post-revolution contexts like Egypt, and whether they have any relevance at all, or that given some changes they could be relevant?
Okay, well let's collect a few questions and then I'll let everybody answer them.
Thank you very much. My name is Julia Bayer and I'm a graduate student at the Hella School at Brown University. And I was wondering, because you talked about the role of international organizations in Egypt, Tunisia and Libya, what your point of view is on Syria. And yeah, thanks.
Okay, let's see. Okay, why don't we start with those and then we'll go back and take some more. So, Inji, would you like to speak about
the famous NDI
and IRR?
Yeah. The NDI and IRR have been in Egypt for quite a while, and yet, despite everything, have done very little to promote democracy. Their agenda was very clear, promoting democracy. But we need to remember that this was at a time when meaning promoting democracy means removing the dictator, who was the U.S.'s best friend. It took the U.S. quite a while to stand on the right side of history and demand him to leave. So during that phase, even as NGOs, I used to meet them, and the people there, we have to distinguish between the people and the organization. The people really had a heartfelt need to help Egypt, and the problem was, their mandate was the opposite. They were supposed to go through the processes. And the problem was that they really wanted Egypt to become democratic. But to do so, they would have to do a bit more than what they're doing. I think organizations succeed when, as I said before, the agenda is aligned. The problem with the NDI and IRI is their slogans, their mandate, their raison d'etre was to advocate for democracy. The government here, as President Bush personally told me once, needed something from my boss. At that time, my boss was President Mubarak, that is. He assumed he was my boss. And therefore, they had to support him. So, what if you were an employee in NDI and IR? and you went to a country and you saw such suffering, poverty, oppression, torture, and you felt for the country so much, and your mandate was to help that country, yet you know very well that you cannot really help, you just have to take the motions to help. So that's why I really had a very difficult time building credibility in Egypt. On the other hand, if you looked at Freedom House, that was an organization that really did what it wanted to do. At stake, many other things. So, in response to your question, I think international organizations that have a mandate to do something that is aligned with their raison d'etre, their reason of being, and aligned with the country's agenda, will succeed. Anything else won't. Does that answer?
Would any of you like to comment on Syria? I mean, on what kind of I don't know, what kind of international engagement with civil society and so forth in Syria is worthwhile now, could be envisaged in a future stage?
Yeah, I'm kind of a fool by trying to answer this, but you know, it's Syria, of course, it's a very worrisome case, and after having worked or been working in Egypt and Tunisia, and then seeing the Libyan case, one of the other differences of the Libya case is that while in both Egypt and Tunisia it took a lot of blood and tears to get through the revolution, it really took a much prolonged civil war in Libya, and you can see the results of that. And what worries me is that you are hoping, yes, there will be regime change in in Syria, but at what cost? And what would be the results once the whole thing has finalized? And unlike Libya, for whatever reasons, the responsible international community has been a lot less proactive. And I think that is being seen within different levels of society, including civil society in the country, that are feeling that the international community is not really responding to their needs. Whereas in Libya, you do have the people feeling that the international community came in and supported them at some stage. So that will create a different and more problematic scenario for the international community in Syria. What kind of role we'll have, and of course me being a UN bureaucrat, it all depends on what kind of mandate we get. And will you try to just get some kind of mandate from the new government when it gets installed? Will it be some kind of Security Council resolution, which has a much more articulated role? It's really too early to see, but I don't see, unlike Libya, where even before Gaddafi, months before Gaddafi was overthrown, there was a very articulate plan of the international community to support the post-regime problem. In Syria, I'm not aware. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm not aware of that. So.
Thank you, Carlos. Okay, we're running almost out of time, so what I'm going to do is take all the rest of the questions and then give each of the panelists a few minutes to respond.
Hello, this is Glenda Lopez. I'm taking the Master in International Cooperation in Spain. So my question is related with we have 3 or 4 generations here. The first one who tried to get involved with the revolution, the other one that stayed the revolution, and now the new generation. So how we can take all these generations to make details about it, what they needed to be accomplished all the success for the process, and specific to pass these goals for the new generation. That is for me important to recognize this reflection. And the other thing is that democracy is an exercise. So in this way, maybe you can help me with the reflection. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Maulik Patel. I am from Base University, New York. I have basically 2 questions. One to Mr. Carlos. You mentioned about Syria. Like right now, after Kofi Annan delegation, even killings are going on. So right now, what would be the way forward for Syria? That was my first question. Like right now, it is difficult to remove the current regime. So what would be the role of UN, and what would be the role of civil society to like topple that government? That would be the first one. And second question was about NGOs' role in Egypt. Right now, international community doubts about the roles of NGOs in like Egypt. But right now, if the democratic wants, if it has to succeed in Egypt, the collaboration of NGOs and international bodies like UN would be the most important thing. So what both of them can do to make this process more successful in Egypt?
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Hussein Hijji, and I'm coming from Carnegie Mellon, Qatar. And in Qatar, we do a lot of money fundraising for the countries who are doing revolutions like Egypt and Syria. And I believe whenever I donate to these countries, this money go to the good of Egypt. And Ms. Haddad has indicated that some of this money could actually lead to corruption. So this leads me to three questions. The first is, to whom...
Three very short questions.
Yeah. Three very short questions. First is to whom does this money go to, and how these money are being used, and how are they supposed to be used if we're saying this should be for the good of Egypt or Syria?
Thank you.
Thank you. This is Diwan. I'm with the Kennedy School and CID, Center for International Development. I want to start by praising Duncan for his very good taste. You've selected some of the best we have in the region and international community. This has been a fantastic panel. Two very quick points. One, to broaden the theme of international support, we should really also put on the table the fact there's been a massive failure of the international community to help Tunisia and Egypt as they are going through a very difficult period. Growth is collapsing. Egypt is close to a financial crisis. In all likelihood, the new president will take over in the midst of a massive financial crisis and will have to deal with that in addition to all the political complications. Now, this is not unlike other democratic traditions, transitions. Typically, the economies do go down and then come back over time. And it has to do with all the difficulties. You're talking about the suspicions, the fact that you have a divided polity in the country during these transitions. But in addition to that, we have the difficulties in Europe and all that. But let's note that failure and keep the pressure to try to think of solutions. Both countries have the means to borrow if they can only have programs around which to rally international support. So that's my main point. The second point is simply to echo what Inji have said. We are discussing the possibility of a collaboration between Harvard and Egypt, her NGO, where we would bring together students from Harvard and from Egypt to work on documenting some of the big cases of corruption that have happened in the past. So I'm saying that simply in case people are interested to participate in that on a semi-voluntary basis over the summer, to contact me at CID. Thank you.
Thank you. And I very much agree with you on the failure to provide the kind of economic support and incentives to these political transitions. It's a major issue.
Very quickly, thank you so much for the comments. My name is Christina Salib. I advise for UNDP. I have advised for Timor-Leste. I'm also of Egyptian background, Coptic Egyptian background, so therefore I'm a minority in Egypt. So my question would be then, looking at the Timor experience, representations of women in elections have been significant there. The empirical data has showed, they followed kind of a 30% guideline or above taken from CEDAW. And the empirical data shows that makes a significant difference in domestic violence laws passed, which is a huge issue in Timor. So my question in the Egypt case is, especially given what I know of religious minorities there, what if the election processes are taken as you have commented, that with procedures that may not be
seen or observed fully, what mechanisms would exist to protect those minorities, which could make a key difference in honoring the goals of the revolution for all to participate and human rights to actually be respected?
Thank you, Christina. And I'm going to take the liberty of expanding your question to apply to women in these cases too, because you're quite right that women, as well as religious minorities, are very underrepresented in electoral results in Egypt. And we can also discuss this regarding a big issue in Tunisia as well. So I'm going to give each of you just a couple of minutes to respond to the points. That you don't have to respond to every single point. We'll start with you, Omzi.
Okay, I will answer the question concerning youth and women participation. Actually, youth were in front of the march and protest during revolution, and they were leading it in a network, also virtual network. But then we saw that they were not participating in the process of democratization. Only 17% of young people voted, and also political parties did not have the will to place young people in leadership or heading lists. So we are really underrepresented in this National Constituent Assembly. And I think also young people don't feel that they can change things in politics. They don't trust politics, and it's our job as young people in political parties to make them believe that they can do things. But today we don't reach the media. Media are not interested in covering what young people are doing, whether in civil society or political parties. So it's difficult to reach other young people. Concerning women participation, in Tunisia, after revolution, we had a very progressive law stating that all lists of candidates should have parity, which means 50% of women candidates and 50% of men candidates. Not only parity, but also what we call zebra system, which means that it is an alternation between men and women. And when we have a chief candidate, which is a man, the second candidate is a woman, and so forth. And the opposite also, a woman can lead a list. But what we saw that we had parity in vertical parity, but we didn't have horizontal parity between in parties. So 93% of the lists were headed by men, and only 7% were led by women, which means today that in the National Constituent Assembly we have a very important percentage of women. We are at 27% actually, which is more than US Congress. But it shows also that mentalities are not ready to let women lead in political parties, and this is something that we really need to work on. I think that's what I want to say.
Thank you very much, Carlos.
Yeah, I'll quickly comment on the women thing. On the women's participation, of course, everybody would want to see the promotion of women's participation, not just as voters, which is also important, but also as candidates and actually as elected members of parliament. What we have seen is that there is a need in many of the countries that are going through transitions to have special measures to ensure that there's some kind of meaningful representation of women and minorities. The special measures cannot be set off in generic terms. They're always very much attached to the kind of electoral system that you determine. Now, the choice of electoral system in all of the three countries we're talking about was not made thinking in terms of representation of women and minorities. It was made taking into consideration a lot of other different elements. We tried, very unsuccessfully in the case of Egypt, to show that it was important to have some kind of special measures for women. In fact, what it was done was to go back, and the results are actually quite appalling. I think, it's especially given the role of women in the Egyptian revolution and the Egyptian political life. In Tunisia, while there were problems, you do see a fairly important participation of women. It's good to note that the lessons from Tunisia were learned in Libya, and in the electoral law in Libya you do have vertical and horizontal parity, as it's called. The only problem is that because they have a mixed system, as in the Egyptian case, the number of seats of, that are in proportional representation, and that's what you need in order to have that kind of special measure, is smaller. But still, those are good, small steps. We are trying to promote the discussions now that the constitutional discussions are ongoing about the need to think on the principles for choosing electoral systems, and in particularly how to ensure that minorities and women are well represented. And one of our new sub-regional seminars in about 3 months would be the lessons learned about the promotion of women in the transitional elections in Egypt, Tunisia, and Libya, and I hope my co-panelists will be present there. Just very quickly about Syria, I have to be very honest, I have no idea what the way forward is. I wish somebody did, because what's going on, it's terrible. You know, being in the UN, you always know that it's easy to have a policy once all member states agree. The big difficulty is when you have member states that don't agree with each other, then it's very difficult to have a consolidated response. So what would be the way forward in Syria? You know, everybody's looking for the answer. I would be a fool to try to say anything about that.
Okay, I'll go quickly across all points, and I will first check out my fellow Egyptian and want to tell you that as an NGO we have a movement called Shaifinkum. It means we're watching you. We already have 100,000 volunteers that will monitor the presidential election. My comment was not about international monitors. We welcome that. My understanding also that the Carter Foundation is going to monitor the presidential election in Egypt. I don't know, but that's what I heard. And my comment was related to Egyptian civil society being paid per paper filled to monitor an election. That is what I was remarking on. But of course, international or neutral monitoring is very important to guarantee the right of the minority, to guarantee the right of the religious minority, the ideological minority, the gender minority. These are all very, very important minorities. With regards to women in Egypt, it's very unfortunate that 98% of our parliament is men that have been voted by 52.5% of women. I mean, they succeeded only because women selected them. I think the issue of women is a bit more deeper than just affirmative or quota. I think what has happened and what we have been seeing in our country at least is that women are very reluctant to vote for other women. It's that simple. And I have a friend of mine had nominated herself to the presidency. All that was requested of her was to get 30,000 signatories. Now, to give you some numbers, we have a group, we as a network have around 250,000 members. She's a co-founder with me in that network. She has around 350,000 Twitter followers. All we could get was 8,000 signatures, 7,000 from men, only 1,000 from women. So it's a bit more than quota, and I've been discussing this when I was here, and I've got some promises, and I intend to make sure I follow up on them, that I get some data and some research that may help us try and tackle this issue. On the issue of the massive failure to provide support, I totally agree. It's not just a massive failure. We're being, in a way, I think Tunisia the same, blackmailed. I recall our Prime Minister standing up saying Saudi Arabia had promised us money, Qatar promised us money, and now they're reserving the money until we select a president. Other discussions are that if we dare sentence Mubarak, there will be no aid. So, this is what I meant. Support has an agenda. Nobody does it for free. Sometimes the agenda is very harsh, though. To take a country to the limit of bankruptcy, to push towards a threat of a second very violent revolution is not that smart. What else do we have here? Money fundraising for Qatar. Again, I was not meaning individual fundraisers. I was meaning money coming from the country. Our understanding is that money came from Qatar straight to several foundations in Egypt that established the Noor Party, which is the Salafi party in Egypt, and that was in the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars. And because of the relationship with the Gulf, they decided to pick up NTI and IRI, which only got like $10 million, and leave the Salafi party of the North that got something like $500 million, but that's okay. So I don't know if I answered all the questions, but I think I answered everything I could.
Thank you, Angie. Yeah, thank you. I think one of the really interesting things that's been coming out here is although we in the United States and Europe and international organizations such as the UN should be, questioning ourselves and are we doing things the right way, we also have to remember we're not the only international actors here. And, even if we choose to say, well, we're not doing such a good job, maybe we should stay out, there are other players, especially the Gulf states, who are not going to stay out and who are going to be very big players in promoting political change of one kind or another in these countries. I want to thank all of you for your wonderful questions. I want to thank the Kennedy School for inviting all of us, thank Duncan for organizing this wonderful panel. Thank you to both of you. And please join me in thanking our three panelists.
I'd encourage everyone to continue the gender conversation at the panel that's going on probably right now.